Welcome to the podcast, Raising Unstoppable Teens. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly Shear, teen breakthrough expert and founder of Academy for Independence. And I'm super excited about our guest today, Lauren K. Carlson. So let's welcome Lauren to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you because I believe your work is super important. So I'd like to read Lauren's bio, and then after that, we'll just take a quick break to thank our sponsor, and then we'll get into some questions. So Lauren K. Carlson is the author of Raising Kids to Understand Consent, and she has a workbook series, Consent for Kids. As a mother and victim of assault herself, Lauren Carlson has used her experiences to guide parents and educators as they talk to children about setting boundaries and respecting others. Previously, Lauren has published the children's book, My Body is My Own, which is highly recommended by pediatricians and clinical psychologists as an entry point to begin important conversations. When Lauren is not busy writing or painting, she is juggling the life with 3 kids in the suburbs of Chicago. So again, welcome to the show, Lauren. I can't wait to get into the questions.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so before we get into the questions, I would like to thank our sponsor, Deborah Wiener, who is an intuitive transformational healer. And she's offering our listeners today a free 15-minute phone call to receive an intuitive tip that could change your life. To take advantage of that, her telephone number is area code 925-580-0350. And she works to see where one's energy field and flow is blocked, which causes a lot of negative events, relationships, and health issues in our lives. By changing the energy within you and around you, positive change occurs in all aspects of your life: career, relationships, health, even money. So again, to take advantage of that 15-minute free phone call with Deborah to get some intuitive tip that could really transform your life, her number is 925-580-0350, or you can email her at dwiener, WIENER 30 @gmail.com. Okay, so back to Lauren K. Carlson. So my first question for you is, what were your teen years like?
Growing up for me, I came from a very sheltered, small town, and I graduated with a graduating class of 52. So I grew up in a very open household. We talked about feelings and premarital sex and all of those things, but we didn't spend a lot of time talking about consent.
Wow. And that's really a huge, huge important distinction, actually.
Right.
And that kind of leads into my next question. How does the topic of consent differ from this sex talk?
Right. Usually the idea of consent is associated with someone's agreement to have sex. But the true broader definition of consent is understanding that you are allowed to choose how you want to be treated physically or emotionally. So if we can separate the sexual aspect of consent, we are left with how to respect yourself and how to respect others.
Nice. Okay. And when should parents start the conversations about consent?
If we are talking about respecting others, these are conversations that can start as early as birth. Every time you're having a conversation about someone needing privacy when they're changing clothes, or as a mom, needing privacy when I go to the bathroom, these are all topics that can begin as early as birth or toddlers. You're teaching children that it's okay for you to set a boundary and to expect others to respect that boundary.
That's awesome. And I think that's a really important point, that it's not that it begins as so early, and just even those indirect messaging of, if they want their privacy, that you're respecting that, and that you as a parent, even setting boundaries, you are also role modeling the importance of that and
Right,
respecting that. And that
right,
begins at a very young age.
right.
Sooner the better, right?
Yeah, I believe we shouldn't have, instead of having the sex talk, just incorporating it into everyday living. You
Mhm.
are teaching children every day how to set boundaries and how it's okay, and
Yeah.
how to recognize the boundaries of others.
No, that's awesome. And I think so often many of us are people pleasing, or we're making strides, but even when I was a kid, I mean, the whole gender stereotype about girls, being nice and
Right.
playing nice, and that kind of goes against, there's almost, when you start to set boundaries, sometimes it feels like it goes against being nice. So the
Right.
whole idea of consent really is about being nice to you first,
Right.
honoring
And
and respecting.
understanding that your feelings matter,
Mhm.
and not being ashamed of that.
I love that. Thank you. So, why you touched upon this, but maybe we could go a little bit deeper on this. Why is teaching consent so important for our children?
Right. So I believe consent education should be broken into three different areas. The first is setting boundaries for yourself. So we are teaching our children, we're empowering them to know that their feelings matter and that their body is their own. They have the right to choose.
Mhm.
The second is respecting the boundaries of others. So we are teaching our children to recognize the boundaries of others and keep them out of making a mistake that could be life changing for them or for someone else. And the last is using their voice when speaking to an adult. So, like you said, it is very difficult for children to know that they are allowed to say no to an adult, because as parents, we always say, you can't say no to me. Well, we want our children to know that if someone's disrespecting their bodies, they can say no to keep them out of potential dangerous situations. So, for all of those reasons, we're keeping them safe, we're keeping them from hurting others.
Mhm.
And we are empowering them to know that their opinion matters.
Right. And that's huge. I think when we feel empowered that we matter, that our
Right.
feelings matter, like we don't need an excuse for it. If
Oh,
we're
right.
uncomfortable in that moment, no means no. I mean, I
Right.
know that seems really simple, but
Children
just
aren't
having that mindset
right.
is very empowering. And but we have to teach it, because it doesn't, because I feel like our conditioning kind of, again, it's about thinking of others or whatever. So it's something that we do need to learn. And again, the sooner that you learn it, the more it becomes your own, I believe, and more of a habit, where you
Right.
feel okay with expressing and setting your boundaries and expecting others to respect that.
Right. Right.
Awesome. Okay, so this is funny. I have the list of questions, and here I say no means no, and it's not that simple. And my next question on here is, how is consent more than no means no? So that was ironic, but
Right. So, I believe that by telling kids no means no, or teaching that as a part of sexual assault prevention, really forgets and ignores the fact that you have to give someone the option to say no.
Mhm.
So if we are not asking the question, then how can someone have the opportunity to say no? So for me particularly, I never said no, and it was still something that happened to me. So if we are talking about affirmative consent and how to recognize boundaries, there never has to be a no if we ask and understand what other people's boundaries are.
Mhm. That's really key. I like the ask, and even the communication piece of, again, having this education so that it's clear, and, our children and on up to
Right.
adulthood know where they stand,
Right.
and are in that empowered place, then it's easier to be able to communicate your needs, your expectations. I mean, I'm thinking of like if you're in a romantic relationship or even a friendship, really any relationship,
Exactly.
to be able to be open and honest with your stance and what the expectations are. And that's helpful not only for the person stating that, but it's actually beneficial for the person receiving that, so that they're clear and
Right.
there's less miscommunication, I guess.
Right. Right.
So awesome. Okay. And this also, I want to say too, when you hold that stance, you're giving the other person permission to, because they may have not been taught about boundaries and kind of processing through what
Correct.
their expectations are. And so by you doing that, you're setting an example. So how can we promote healthy relationship choices in the future for our children?
By talking to your children about how to set boundaries with friends and how to recognize healthy and unhealthy friendship behaviors. These are all qualities that we are teaching our children to look for in a potential mate as they mature. We are allowing them to say, this is not okay for how I want to be treated. And eventually, as they mature and look for someone romantically, those are all things that they are able to carry on and pick a potential person to avoid an abusive situation.
Okay. And I'm wondering if you could give like a little example, just an example of maybe teenage versus 3 to 5 year old, an example of how to give them the message about boundaries or
Sure. So what I normally do is I break down one big scenario. I call them a case study, even though it's made up. But so I go through one specific case study with children, and I always leave the amount of the sexual aspect of the example very open-ended, because I know that as people talk to their children, they will be able to cater it to what maturity level their child is. So if I say to someone in a grade 3 to 5, you're at a sleepover with a friend and their sister walks into the bathroom and starts talking about what movie you want to watch later, and you don't really know what to do because this is a situation that you don't know, and how you can say, we'll talk about that after, you have to leave. And I go through, well, so then the girl says, can you leave? And the sister says, well, I don't have to, we're both girls, it's fine. And how that still makes her uncomfortable. And so I break down things like that for, and as opposed to 7 or a grade 6 to 8, where you're on a date with your boyfriend or with a boy you like, and he puts his hand on your knee and you're not comfortable with that, and how you can say you're not comfortable with that, and him saying, well, but I paid for your ticket, or anything like that. As your child, everything that you watch on TV can be an example, and you say, are you uncomfortable with that? And everyone's going to be different and respect their level of comfort. But I like to lead with examples. And how would you feel, and understand that sometimes my son says, well, that doesn't bother me. Okay, well, great. So I like to do with examples like that.
That's awesome. And I also think too that even if your child or teenager says, it doesn't apply to me, or
Right.
It doesn't bother me, the fact that you still have the discussion,
Right.
And they're still listening.
Yeah.
So if 6 months later that scenario happens and now they do care, they've kind of talked about this,
Right. And it gets
earlier.
in their head that other people may be uncomfortable with that. So
Ah,
it then opens it up to, I'm not uncomfortable with someone walking into the bathroom if it's my friend, but what if they are? And then you have to consider that. So I think any amount of talking about it, even if it's something that they are comfortable with,
mhm.
can trigger thoughts for how to recognize and think about boundaries in a different way.
Nice. I really like that. And then I also have a question. I'm not sure if it's a question or a statement, but I'd like your feedback on it.
Okay.
That I think also sometimes when we I've kind of lost it here, when we assert our boundaries, there and we can feel good about asserting our boundaries, but what do I want to say? Sometimes that can just be scary. Um,
Right.
because we don't want to lose the person.
Right.
So what do you say to, what would be
What I
something?
would say to that is that there will be certainly times that I remember being a teen and your boyfriend did something and you don't want to say no because what would his reaction be? And I think the more we empower girls and boys to be okay with saying that their opinion matters,
Mhm,
we are then teaching them these are not the right people for them.
mhm,
And it makes me every time you have that conversation, I think with girls especially, they have to be pleasers, but I like to speak to boys and girls.
mhm.
But this particular situation I believe affects girls, teen girls more. But the idea that you don't want to disappoint someone, and
Mhm.
those are things that we need to talk about and say that that's just not the relationship for you.
Right. Okay. And another thing also comes up for me as well is that when you assert your boundaries and yes, and you want to please others, but I think sometimes others might take that personally
Right.
as a rejection. And that's where things can get muddy, so to speak.
Right.
And then the person asserting themselves might feel bad. And then the next time around, maybe not be so assertive. So
Right.
what's your feedback on that
Well,
scenario?
I can think of an exact example in one of my books of this, where then someone's mad and then you try to make it better, and then you end up being the one who feels bad. For me, I think that that's why consent education is so focused on telling people they can say no, or no means no, but we need to teach children and teens that it's okay for someone to say no to you.
Mhm.
And that's not a reflection of you, or maybe it is, but either way, either way, they're saying no. And that's not something you should be angry about or take out on them later. That's why I focus so much on it's both aspects. You have to be able to put your boundaries down, but you also have to accept the boundaries of others.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's easier that if you are mindful and conscious of setting your own boundaries and being that empowered space, then when somebody else is setting theirs,
Right.
that's kind of the mindset you're looking at it. You're both in an empowered place,
Right.
as opposed to looking at it like, I've hurt their feelings
Right.
or whatever. I mean,
Right.
taking a
Exactly.
negative way. And I think too, what you had said just then, and also your previous comment on maybe that's not the right friendship or person
Right.
for you. Again, if there's a pattern of not really respecting your boundaries or taking it personally, one that is kind of a manipulative
Right.
technique to control.
Right.
So that might be a warning sign. But really, bottom line, it probably is more of an unhealthy, if it continued, would be an unhealthy relationship.
Right.
Because a healthy relationship, I think, really is respecting each other's boundaries. And
Right.
again, being able to communicate those and the expectations so that both of you are on the same page and it's more equalized.
Right.
So
Right.
um,
Completely agree.
yeah. And I loved also what you said about, girls especially being people pleasers, again, that stereotype that many of us have been conditioned. But you said, this is for boys too. And listeners have halfway through her newest book, which we'll get to talking about in a moment, but it's fabulous. And one of the things that I love in there is that you bring up a scenario where, I mean, this was one of the first scenarios where it was the man that really felt uncomfortable.
Right.
And then you ask the reader, would it have made any difference if it was reversed, and I love that, because when it comes to boundaries and communication, it really doesn't matter what gender, what sex you are. I mean, these things apply across the board.
Right. I think I take even more of over the line of exposing what a male victim would go through. According to the percentages, the percentages are way lower for reported cases for men or for boys, but I believe that it's so much harder for them to come out and talk about what happened to them because it's just not manly. Or especially for a teenager, you should have liked it or anything like that. And I just think that is, every case like that makes me want to hold them just because it's such a hard thing. I know how hard it was for me to come to terms with what happened to me. And if there was additional shame put on to me because I was a boy and it shouldn't have happened, or I should have been too tough and it shouldn't hurt me, I feel so much for male victims. So that's why I spend so much time. You'll see lots more as you get older into the book. More examples of questions like that. I ask kids, I believe there's one for 3 to 5, where would it have been different if they had done this to a sister and instead of a brother? And just because I do want people to think about, look at it, if this is how we would treat our daughters, this is also how we should treat our sons. So I think it's very important to me.
I love that. I love that aspect, that element that you also bring into the book. And I think in general, again, we go back to conditioning. It's not okay for boys to cry. I mean, we're becoming a little more, we're going on the right path to changing that, but we've got a long way to go. And it still doesn't change, the teens and the college kids and the adults now, because that was their conditioning. And, so to be able to even express your feelings, that alone, other than anger, like anger is okay, but you can't be hurt and stuff. So I love that you were that thoughtful to, have the readers really also consider that, because I do think it would be harder for boys, and there's probably more shame associated. And
even during the Me Too movement 3 years ago, saying, support women, or and there were so many men that I followed saying, I didn't even feel at home here in a Me Too protest. I felt even an outcast here, and it made me sad and hurt for them, because we're all coming together and gaining our empowerment, and we're leaving a huge chunk of these victims out. So it's important.
It is important, and I can feel your passion about that mission. Yeah. And the other thing that comes to me with this, and I think there was something I read in your book, and I don't recall, it wasn't exactly stated like this, but I remember when my daughter, she went to an anti-rape rally at the college, and they went through the street. And what I loved was the sign said, don't get raped. And then they crossed out don't rape. Gosh, it gives me chills right now. And again, that was a different mindset, because the message of don't get raped is still like the responsibility is on whoever, the victim. Whereas don't rape, that's kind of putting the responsibility on the person who's actually raping.
So for me personally, that was very important. I always felt like you had to go out and protect yourself. And I think that this was 15 years ago where I first felt, why are we telling our girls to dress more modestly and not tell our boys to to learn how to control themselves. And I don't like that stereotype because I don't want to be the type of person who talks about assault only being boys against girls. Again, I do not like to do that. But statistically, I think that we are all focused on the female victim and how she needs to act to not get raped. So.
Mhm. And I want to fast forward it a little bit with my daughter now. I was so excited about this interview. More people, because she has worked in with inmates and so forth,
Right.
and some of the guys that are in there for, sex crimes or assault and stuff like that, they have to go through training, and a lot of it is about consent education.
Right.
And because she's kind of privy to some of that, she says, I wish everybody got this kind of training. So again, it's powerful.
I think it's a lot of information that the general public isn't thinking about.
Mhm.
What is the mind of a predator? And I think that if we all thought about it a little more, we would be able to recognize the red flag behaviors.
Mhm. Nice. Okay. So well, you say the red flag, so I'm going to go out of order on my
Okay.
questions there. How can we spot the red flag behaviors of others before they become dangerous?
Right. So as a parent, there are a couple of red flag behaviors that I really like to highlight. The first is very simple. It's just increased physical touch. So if you notice that there is someone who is touching or hugging or just closer with your child than you seem to think is regular, it's a red flag. And that seems easy, but also we like to make excuses and figure out a way for this to be okay in our head. But this one is it just makes sense. The next one would be communicating with your child outside of their role. So if you have a teacher or a coach or a minister, youth group, anything like that, who's texting or connecting with your child on social media, outside of what you deem the norm for what that person needs to be communicating, those are red flags. Those are trying to become friends with your child, and there needs to be a line between teacher or coach and your child. So things like that are red flags. Another would be expensive gifts. So if there are someone who buys things or gives something to your child for no reason, or something way more extravagant than you understand, these are things that can be grooming your child or even paying back for something that they've already done to your child. So a lot of times you are paying them off or to make them be okay with something that has happened. So those are some of the red flags that I recommend parents watch for. Another is secret keeping.
Mhm.
Anytime there is an adult that asks a child to keep a secret, especially when it relates to their body, that is a huge red flag for me. It is something that as a mother, we don't do secrets, we do surprises. I never want my children to think that they should be told by anyone to keep a secret from me, especially about their boundaries.
Mhm.
So that is something that even if it's not someone that's potentially dangerous to them, in the future, if someone is potentially dangerous,
Mhm.
then they think, well, grandma says I can do this. So it's fine if this person tells me to keep a secret too. So it's something that all of these are red flag behaviors.
Thank you. And those are really great tips, because I knew about, I can guess about with the gifts is kind of
Right.
like a way to keep the secret, really,
Right.
and to manipulate and to reinforce
Right.
for that behavior and the assault to continue, or the sexual abuse.
Right.
If it doesn't feel right and it feels like over the top, that is just again a warning sign.
Right.
So and then also what I heard in what you said is if you feel, if you just feel a little uneasy with it, kind of don't ignore that. That's your
Right.
intuition. and maybe it's nothing, but you want to listen to it and be observant and maybe still even talk with your child, because you rather err on bringing it up and hopefully getting, keeping your kids safe than, it being something and it's never addressed.
Right. So I actually go into this in my book. I talk a lot about how there are potential sexual predators who push the limits in front of parents on purpose, with increased increased physical touch or gift giving or hugging in front of the child, in front of the parent, because if the parent doesn't speak up, then that child is receiving the information that this amount of touching is fine. So there are some very high profile cases, especially with physicians who did this with their victims, with the mother in the room, and the mother couldn't tell, but the child then sees in their mind, they hear, oh, so that's fine. And so they do it on purpose. So if you see anything that seems strange, the worst you can do is make someone very uncomfortable. The best thing you could do is be protecting your child from a predator. So I always say, if it makes you uncomfortable, just like we're telling our children, if you're uncomfortable, set your boundaries. As a mother, if I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to set that boundary.
Yes. And again, you bring up a really good point, because I know of some of those high profile examples, and I love the point that you may not know, you may not, but it is that indirect, that unspoken messaging. That's very clever to, be inappropriately touching, your child in your presence, because the child doesn't know that you don't know. And so it is kind of like, so this is okay. I mean, I can see where this.
And then later on, the predator can say, well, this was exactly the same as I did on Christmas Day in front of your mother. It's fine, because remember, everyone saw. So the big difference for me between sexual assault and then the grooming process is sexual assault normally takes place as a one-time event, and you are aware that it's wrong. Grooming is making a child and family feel that what's happening is fine. So it is a lot like gaslighting, where we do it slowly, and we're just conditioning you to be okay with what's about to happen. So all of those things, the gifts and the secrets and the communicating, and it's just a slow process towards abuse. So the beginning of the grooming process, the first 4 steps are things that a child is probably not going to recognize, because they just seem like they have a really nice friend. And it's strange that this adult wants to be friends with them, but that's exciting and fun. But those are the steps that if parents can notice them, then you can prevent the assault. Until the predator attempts to make the relationship sexual, that's the first time that a child might recognize, whoa, this is very strange. But before that, all of the extra hugs or gifts or calling me during the summer, if you're my teacher, all of those things are not necessarily going to be red flags for children. Those are red flags for adults.
Wow. Yes, that's a very good distinction. And again, I just want to point out that this is why the earlier we start this conversation and, teach our kids the importance of their boundaries and respecting themselves and their body and their feelings, all of it, the whole person, the better. That if something, in the grooming process, as you say, it might be red flags to them at that point, because they have been taught differently. And so awesome. Okay. Well, we didn't get to your book, but I do want to mention it. I want to mention, have you mention your contact information and all of that as well. And listeners, I believe that we're probably going to have a second episode with Lauren, because I really do want to dive in a little bit more to her phenomenal book that I think every parent should read. And but we can learn a little bit more about that in another episode. But for now, please tell us about your book, the workbooks, and also how our listeners can learn more about, get a copy of your book and learn more about you.
Okay. My website is called Imperfectly Bold. And everything, you can review all the books there. They're also available on Amazon. If you search Lauren K. Carlson, all of my books are there. There's an author page. But my most recent book, Raising Children to Understand Consent, is a parent's guide to incorporating the topics of consent into everyday living.
Mhm.
Because I believe, like we talked about, it should be a conversation for every single day.
Mhm.
So it's broken down into age groups for 4 different age groups. So you can read the sections that apply to you and skip the rest, and then read them 3 years later and learn new information because your child's different. I also have workbooks out there that were intended to be used in schools, but I found that parents were buying them and doing a consent education at home. So those are available, Consent for Kids.
Mhm.
And all of those are available, like I said, on Amazon or on imperfectlybold.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule, especially with 3 children.
Yes.
And we definitely appreciate it. And again, your mission is an incredible one, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you've written these books, because they will help and help keep our kids safe and help so many of us parents, because this is it's a hard topic, and
Right.
with that saying, that is so old but true. We're not given a training manual, so when we have a book like this that's easy to read and goes by age, you can just go to the book and there it is. You're informed, and then you can teach your child at whatever age they're at. So
Yeah, well,
brilliant.
I'm so glad you loved it. Thank you so
I
much.
did love it. So,
Thank
okay, well, until next time, we're going to conclude this show. And here's to unstoppable teens, unstoppable dreams.